2:47 a.m., June 14th, 2026. Pensacola, Florida. 14 federal agents moved in a 2-column stack across the parking lot of a self-storage facility on West 9 Mile Road. Headlights off. Radio silence. In the lead agent's earpiece, one word: execute. The unit converged on storage bay 114. The door rolled up in 4 seconds. Inside, a folding table, a laptop, and a man in civilian clothes reaching for a canvas bag. He didn't make it. Petty Officer First Class Darien Kowalczyk, 14-year Navy aviation mechanic, top secret clearance, 2 commendations for meritorious service, was face down on the concrete floor with his hands behind his back before the bag hit the ground. On the table beside the laptop, a USB drive, roughly the size of a thumb. Estimated value of what was on it, $2, 4 million. That was the figure in crypto payments already transferred. What the intelligence itself could have enabled had no clean dollar value. This is not a story about a spy who slipped through the cracks. It's a story about a system that almost worked, and a single scheduling discrepancy in a travel reimbursement form that unraveled everything. Kowalczyk had been selling operational data on U.S. Navy assets in the Strait of Hormuz corridor for over 4 months. His buyers were linked to an Iranian-affiliated broker network operating through 3 proxy jurisdictions. His payments arrived in Monero, a privacy-optimized cryptocurrency with no public transaction trail. He had 4 million reasons to believe he was untouchable. He was wrong by exactly 31 surveillance nights. Darien Kowalczyk arrived at Naval Air Station Pensacola in March 2012. His military record was textbook. No disciplinary actions. No financial stress flags in his periodic reinvestigation files. 2 formal commendations. One for troubleshooting a maintenance anomaly on an MH-60s that could have grounded a 4-aircraft flight schedule. Another for sustained performance during a deployment rotation through Bahrain in 2021. By every available metric, an ideal petty officer. His access matched that record. As a 14-year aviation mechanic with a top-secret clearance, he routinely worked with maintenance data systems that fed into broader logistics and scheduling platforms. Tracking aircraft, readiness, maintenance cycles, and deployment rotations put him at the intersection of operational tempo and positional data for the asset groups he serviced. That access wasn't designed for exploitation. It was necessary for his job. He knew exactly what it was worth to someone who wanted it for other reasons. The arrangement, as NCIS investigators later reconstructed it, began in February 2026. Initial contact came through a spoofed email domain that looked, at a glance, like it belonged to a Raytheon Defense subsidiary. One character was transposed. The visual difference was a single letter that wouldn't register on a fast read of the sender field. The email requested a routine contractor consultation on maintenance compatibility data for a systems upgrade program. It cited internal project codes that matched formats Kowalczyk would have recognized from legitimate acquisition work. He responded. What followed was not coercion, not blackmail, not an accident. By the time the second email exchange occurred, Kowalczyk understood exactly what he was being asked to provide and what he would receive in return. The first payment of $40,000 arrived in a Monero wallet address 8 days after his first data transfer. Routed through a Seychelles-registered cryptocurrency exchange operating under a fintech license that hadn't been updated since 2023. No visible bank trail, no wire transfer, no currency exchange flag. $40,000 for a data package he assembled during a standard shift rotation, pulling from systems he accessed every day. The second payment followed 3 weeks later, $55,000. By April 2026, Kowalczyk had received 6 separate payments ranging from $40,000 to $80,000 per transfer. Aggregate total, $2, 4 million across 4 wallet addresses. He wasn't spending it visibly. No new vehicle, no property purchase. No lifestyle inflation that would have triggered a financial anomaly report under his periodic security review. He was, apparently, waiting. For what? He never explained in subsequent interviews. The break came from a direction no one in the network could have anticipated. I spent time going through the sequence of events that cracked this case, and what kept nagging me was how small the initial thread was. Not a digital intercept, not a human intelligence tip, a reimbursement form. A NCIS financial analyst assigned to routine contractor audit reviews at NAS Pensacola was processing a backlog of travel reimbursement claims in mid-April 2026. Administrative work. Repetitive. The kind of task that generates no attention until something doesn't add up. 2 claims crossed her desk in the same session. both filed by the same petty officer, both referencing the same temporary duty assignment week in Bahrain, both supported by documentation, hotel receipts, transit manifests, per diem vouchers. The dates matched, the locations matched, the signature matched. The problem was structural. One claim showed Kowalczyk on base in Bahrain for the full TDY period. The other showed him in transit, categorized as travel days, for dates that overlapped by 2 full days. Both claims could not be true simultaneously. Under a strict audit, this would generate a flag. Under a routine review, it might generate a query memo that sat in a routing queue for 3 weeks. The analyst flagged it the same afternoon. The memo reached a supervisory NCIS special agent by the following morning. Cross-referencing began within 48 hours. Base access logs for the relevant period showed Kowalczyk's badge was scanned in at the NAS Pensacola facility, not in Bahrain, for a 19-hour window that neither reimbursement claim accounted for. His flight manifest showed a departure. His base access record showed he never left. The gap was 19 hours. It wasn't enough to charge him. It wasn't even enough to formally open a counterintelligence investigation on the access log alone. A discrepancy in a travel reimbursement form is an administrative matter. A 19-hour unaccounted window could have a dozen explanations, but NCIS investigators didn't close the file. They pulled his financial disclosure records. Nothing flagged. They ran a routine communications check through existing monitoring architecture. Nothing triggered. Then they looked at his Pensacola property records. He owned a residential address in Ensley, standard Navy housing area, with a second name on the lease, a woman listed as a domestic partner. That name came back clean. They were 3 steps from calling it an accounting error when a signals intelligence analyst attached to the joint FBI-NCIS task force noticed something in a separate file stream, a spoofed contractor email domain. One character transposed from a Raytheon subsidiary name had been flagged in a passive monitoring sweep 6 weeks earlier, routed for review, tagged as a likely phishing attempt. Low priority. The domain had sent exactly 2 outgoing messages before going dark, both addressed to a NAS Pensacola account, both to the same petty officer. The task force was activated within 72 hours. Here's what most people assume about counterintelligence operations, that they move fast, that once a name surfaces, the arrest follows in days. What the case file actually shows is something different. 11 weeks of methodical surveillance during which Kowalczyk went about his duties, filed his maintenance logs, attended unit briefings, and met his handler 6 times, while a joint federal team tracked every movement. There's a line in one of the early surveillance logs, something about the routine of watching a man who has no idea he's been found. That reads almost like procedural irony. He was still filing maintenance reports on the same aircraft systems he was compromising. The surveillance operation was compartmented under a joint FBI counterintelligence unit working alongside NCIS personnel from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service field office in Pensacola. 22 agents rotated through the surveillance posture over 31 days. No single team maintained continuous coverage. Contact handoffs were designed to avoid pattern recognition by the subject or any associate who might be running counter-surveillance. The first confirmed dead drop exchange occurred on May 3, 2026. The same Pensacola self-storage facility on West 9 Mile Road, Bay 114. Kowalczyk arrived at 9:22 p.m. in his personal vehicle, a 2019 Nissan Frontier registered to the domestic partner address. He spent 11 minutes inside. When he left, the canvas bag he'd entered with was heavier. Surveillance teams did not move on the storage unit. Intervention at that stage would have collapsed the operation and confirmed only a single exchange. The investigative objective was to identify the full network, the broker, the communication chain, the payment architecture, and any additional sources. They waited. The second exchange occurred 11 days later at a marina in Gulf Shores, Alabama. Kowalczyk arrived by vehicle, transferred to a rental boat, paid cash, name on the rental was not his own, and motored out to a second vessel anchored 200 meters offshore. The transfer lasted approximately 8 minutes. He returned the rental. He drove back to Pensacola. The offshore vessel was tracked by a Coast Guard asset operating under a parallel maritime surveillance tasking. Its registration connected to a shell entity incorporated in the Marshall Islands. The third exchange, 2 weeks after that, occurred in a parking garage at Mobile Regional Airport. Level 3. Kowalczyk arrived at 11:07 p.m. and walked to a specific vehicle, a silver SUV with Tennessee plates. He left a package in the wheel well on the driver's side and walked back to his car without stopping. The Tennessee-registered SUV didn't depart immediately. It sat in the garage for 4 hours before moving. Surveillance maintained. The plate traced to a rental agreement signed under a corporate name that didn't appear in any U.S. business registration database. A complication surfaced at the 5-week mark. The communication method between Kowalczyk and his handler had shifted. The spoofed contractor email domain had gone permanently dark after 2 outgoing messages. Subsequent contact appeared to be routed through a secondary channel that digital forensics teams hadn't yet pinpointed. They were tracking his movements. They had confirmed 6 exchanges. They didn't have the communication layer. Without the communication channel, the case against the broker network was circumstantial beyond the subject himself. The FBI's cyber division deployed a targeted network monitoring tool against the IP infrastructure associated with Kowalczyk's residential address. Lawful intercept order issued under FISA. The process took 9 days. What they found was an encrypted messaging application, not commercially available, accessed through a VPN chain terminating in Latvia. The application showed no registered account data. But the traffic pattern had one recurring feature. Messages arrived in batches, at irregular intervals, always between 1 a.m. and 3:30 a.m. Pensacola local time. That timing corresponded to business hours in a time zone 7 to 8 hours ahead. They now had the communication channel. They still didn't have the broker identity. What's most surprising about this case isn't the sophistication of the payment architecture. Monero routing through offshore exchanges is known tradecraft at this point. What's surprising is how conventional the dead drop methodology was. Physical exchanges, predetermined locations, package and wheel well transfers. The broker network was running an operation that combined cutting-edge financial obfuscation with tradecraft that hasn't substantially evolved in 30 years. That gap tells you something about how these networks think about risk. The digital trail worried them. The physical trail, apparently, less so. That was their mistake. Here's the part worth saying plainly. The NCIS financial analyst who flagged the reimbursement discrepancy was doing a job that most people in her position would have processed as routine and moved past. The anomaly wasn't dramatic. 2 overlapping claim dates. An administrative inconsistency that, in a different week, might have generated a query memo and a polite correction request. Instead, it generated this. The institutional architecture of counterintelligence depends, at a basic level, on people who treat anomalies as anomalies, not as paperwork noise. What this case shows is that the entry point into a 4-month operation that ultimately identified at least 3 connected suspects was a reimbursement form with contradictory date sequences. That is simultaneously reassuring and unsettling. Reassuring because the system caught it. Unsettling because the catch was this narrow. By the end of May 2026, the surveillance picture had developed a complication the task force hadn't anticipated. Signals intelligence analysis of the broker network communication pattern identified 2 additional sets of traffic that didn't trace back to Kowalczyk's residential IP. Both showed the same timing signature, messages arriving in the 1 a.m. to 3:30 a.m. window through the same VPN termination point in Latvia to different destination endpoints, different devices, different locations. 2 additional active duty personnel were potentially inside the same network. Their identities were not confirmed at the time of the June operation. Their investigations remain open. NCIS has not released their service branches or duty stations. What the task force knew by the first week of June was that moving against Kowalczyk wouldn't close the network. It would remove 1 node while 2 others potentially remained active. The decision required escalation. NCIS, Headquarters, Washington. FBI Counterintelligence Division, Naval Intelligence Command briefed. The question was whether to extend the operation and try to develop the 2 additional subjects before any arrest, or move against Kowalczyk at the point of maximum evidence and accept that the network would partially survive. Put yourself in the position of the senior agent coordinating that call at 11 p.m. on June 10, 2026. You have a documented espionage case against 1 subject. You have signals suggesting 2 more. Moving early means the broader network scatters. Waiting means more data continues, leaving U.S. government systems for a buyer with clear operational interest in Hormuz corridor movements. The decision was reached on June 12, 2026. Move on Kowalczyk at the next confirmed exchange. Prioritize the arrest and the physical evidence seizure. Accept that the 2 additional subjects would require continued development under separate investigation tracks. The reason for moving was specific. Signals intelligence indicated the next exchange would involve a USB drive containing projected carrier group movement windows for a 10-day operational window in the Strait of Hormuz. That data, if transferred, would be the highest value single intelligence product in the entire 4-month chain. The operational window for U.S. Navy assets in the Hormuz corridor during the relevant period was not abstract. The strait handles roughly 21 million barrels of oil per day in transit. The presence and movement of U.S. carrier groups in that corridor affects deterrence calculations across multiple state actors. Allowing that data to transfer was not a tolerable outcome. June 14, 2026. Final operation briefing at 11 p.m. 14 agents. Primary entry team of 8, secondary containment perimeter of 6. FBI counterintelligence and NCIS joint command. Surveillance confirmed Kowalczyk's vehicle departing his Ensley residence at 1:17 a.m. Route consistent with previous approaches to the storage facility. He stopped once. A gas station on Cervantes Street, inside for 3 minutes, bought a bottled drink, security camera captured. He arrived at the facility at 2:29 a.m. The entry team held position. At 2:41 a.m., signals from the communication monitoring tool indicated an incoming message to Kowalczyk's encrypted application. Content not immediately readable. The architecture required decryption time, but the timestamp and origin matched the handler's established pattern. 6 minutes later, 2:47 a.m., the lead agent gave the order. The team moved across the parking lot in column formation. No lights, no sirens. The storage facility's overnight security guard had been contacted earlier that evening under a cover pretext and was not on site. Access to the facility gate had been arranged through a lawful court order executed 24 hours prior. Bay 114's roll-up door was confirmed unlocked. Kowalczyk had opened it on arrival and hadn't resecured it. The team stacked on the door. 12 seconds from the go order to breach. Entry was immediate. The storage unit measured approximately 10 by 15 feet. Single overhead fluorescent fixture activated. Kowalczyk was at the folding table with his back to the door when the team entered. He turned. He reached for a canvas bag on the table's lower shelf. He didn't reach it. He was on the floor with his hands secured within 7 seconds of breach. No resistance. No verbal confrontation. He didn't say anything during the arrest. The canvas bag contained 3 items: a burner smartphone, a second USB drive different from the one already on the table, and a plastic envelope containing what appeared to be handwritten numeric sequences. The USB drive on the table. The operational target was bagged and tagged as evidence item 1. The laptop was powered on. Agents photographed the screen before touching it. A file transfer progress bar was frozen at 73%. The transfer had been running when the team entered. 73% of the projected carrier group movement data had already transferred to an unknown receiving endpoint before the arrest. The remaining 27% had not. That was the obstacle the team hadn't anticipated, and there was no resolution available at that moment. The partial transfer was a fact. The data already received by the broker network was not recoverable from this operation. The USB drive was preserved as evidence. The laptop was secured for digital forensics. Kowalczyk was transported to a federal holding facility. Crypto seizure followed within 90 minutes. Working from wallet addresses extracted from the devices and corroborated by the Seychelles exchange records obtained through a mutual legal assistance request filed 3 weeks earlier, federal agents executed seizure orders against 4 Monero wallet addresses associated with Kowalczyk's operation. Total seized, $2, 4 million in cryptocurrency equivalent. The seizure wasn't complete. Investigators estimated that an additional $180,000 had been moved from one of the 4 wallets to a 5th address in the 72 hours before the arrest. That 5th address was not identified at the time of seizure. Its current status has not been publicly disclosed. The post-arrest phase produced 1 item of significant intelligence value beyond the devices seized in the storage unit. During a lawful search of Kowalczyk's residential address in Ensley, executed simultaneously with the storage unit operation under a separate search warrant, agents discovered a second laptop in a locked closet. Encrypted. FBI digital forensics required 11 days to partially decrypt it. What the partial decryption revealed was a log Kowalczyk had maintained of every data package he transferred, with timestamps and file size notations. The log used a basic substitution code that the forensics team broke in under 3 hours. The log showed 11 total transfers. The Joint Task Force had confirmed 6 dead drop exchanges through physical surveillance. The additional 5 were digital-only transfers, routed directly through the encrypted application, no physical component. 5 exchanges the surveillance operation hadn't fully mapped. I'll say this plainly. The 11-week surveillance window was almost certainly the right call. The evidence picture that resulted was substantially stronger than an early arrest would have produced. But 5 undetected digital transfers inside that window is a problem the task force will be working through in post-operation review for a long time. The network was using the physical exchanges as decoys, or at minimum as parallel channels. The digital transfers ran independently. That gap in the surveillance architecture mattered. The handwritten numeric sequences in the canvas bag took longer to assess. They weren't an encryption key. At least not for any system the initial forensics team could match. The sequences were forwarded to NSA for analysis. Results have not been made public. Darien Kowalczyk was arraigned on June 20, 2026. Federal charges: 1 count of espionage under 18 U.S.C. Section 794, 2 counts of unauthorized disclosure of national defense information, 1 count of conspiracy to commit espionage, and 1 count of receiving compensation from a foreign government or agent. He was held without bail. His attorney entered a not guilty plea. No cooperation agreement has been publicly disclosed. Here's something that didn't make the broader coverage of this case: the domestic partner listed on Kowalczyk's lease. The woman whose name came back clean in the initial records check was interviewed twice by NCIS investigators in the 2 weeks following the arrest. She was not charged. She was not formally cleared. Her status in the investigation has not been publicly addressed. She relocated within 3 weeks of the arrest. The broker network, as characterized in the federal charging document, operated through at least 3 jurisdictional layers: the spoofed contractor domain, a financial intermediary in the Seychelles, and the encrypted application traffic routing through Latvia. None of the individuals operating those nodes has been publicly identified. No foreign arrests have been announced in connection with the case. The Marshall Islands registered vessel from the Gulf Shores Marina Exchange has not been located. The Tennessee registered rental SUV from the Mobile Airport Garage Exchange was returned to the rental company on June 15, 2026, 1 day after Kowalczyk's arrest. The individual who rented it has not been identified. Investigators confirmed in a post-arrest briefing to command that 2 additional active duty personnel remain under investigation in connection with the broker network. Their identities have not been disclosed. Their service branches have not been disclosed. NCIS characterized both investigations as active and ongoing as of the date of Kowalczyk's arraignment. The data on the USB drive, the projected carrier group movement windows for the Hormuz corridor, is subject to classification review. Its operational impact has not been assessed publicly. The 73% that transferred before the arrest reached an unknown receiving endpoint that has not been publicly identified. One detail that stuck with me going through the case documentation: the file transfer progress bar frozen at 73%. The team entered at exactly the right moment to prevent the complete transfer. They entered 12 seconds too late to prevent any transfer at all. The carrier group movement data that reached the receiving endpoint, whatever portion of that 10-day operational window 73% represented, is in the hands of a network with Iranian-linked broker affiliations. What they did with it, or what operational value it retained given the subsequent arrest and likely change in naval scheduling, is not knowable from the public record. The Navy has not publicly confirmed whether the relevant operational schedules were adjusted following the June 14th arrest. What do you think? When a case like this hinges on a single travel reimbursement anomaly, does that reflect a system working the way it should? Or does it expose how much depends on individual attention at the administrative level? Drop your read in the comments. If federal counterintelligence operations and the cases that define the boundaries of classified access interest you, this channel covers them without the noise. Subscribe now so you don't miss what comes next. The sentencing timeline for Kowalczyk depends on whether he ultimately enters a cooperation agreement. The espionage charge under Section 794 carries a maximum penalty of life imprisonment. The conspiracy count adds additional exposure. Without cooperation, federal prosecutors are unlikely to offer substantial mitigation. His attorney has not publicly signaled any change in the not guilty posture. The broker network continues operating in whatever form survived the June 14th arrest. The Seychelles exchange involved in routing his payments has not been sanctioned or publicly linked to the case in any enforcement action. The encrypted messaging application, the communication infrastructure that made the handler relationship function, remains available to other users. There is no indication in any publicly available documentation that the network's capacity to recruit additional sources was disrupted by this operation. When those movement patterns are compromised, the deterrence calculation shifts. By how much, and in whose favor, is the kind of assessment that doesn't appear in federal charging documents. Will networks like this one continue recruiting active duty personnel with classified access? Comment why yes or no. The recruitment infrastructure didn't disappear when Bay 114's roll-up door went up. Kowalczyk is in federal custody. The two additional suspects remain on active duty under investigation without charges filed. The broker network's principals are unidentified. The money that left the fourth wallet in the 72 hours before the arrest has not been located. The data that transferred at 73% reached a destination that remains unknown. The operation is closed. The case is not. The system found Darien Kowalczyk through a reimbursement form. Two overlapping date sequences on an administrative document that should have been easy to reconcile. And wasn't, because somewhere in a TDY week in Bahrain, 19 hours disappeared from the official record and he couldn't account for them twice in the same way. He was a 14-year petty officer with 2 commendations and a spotless file. He was also a man who spent 4 months transferring Hormuz corridor data to a broker network in batches worth $40,000 to $80,000 each. The system that identified him wasn't designed to catch spies. It was designed to catch duplicate reimbursement claims. That is the footnote this case will carry into the institutional record, that the counterintelligence architecture built around classified access and behavioral monitoring was outpaced, at least temporarily, by a man with a good record and a Monero wallet. And that what finally pulled the thread was an analyst doing administrative work on a Tuesday afternoon. The network that paid him is still looking for the next Kowalczyk. The next Kowalczyk is still out there somewhere, weighing the math.